Live!
Hey, we're live. Good morning. Welcome to B-Cube Sunday morning. And it is a special day. We have our host, Ciiff Empty Chair Winnig, who is here. And he's waiting for me to turn on his mic. But here at B-Cube Press, we do things Bob's way. And yeah, he gets to rant. Hey, you know how you calm down an angry poet? I don't know. Nobody cares. The They're poets, but we wrote a special poem, and just for Ciiff to be able to respond to celebrate the poets coming.
Make sure you turn his mic on first so he can respond.
Yeah, well, we took a vote on whether or not to show it or not, and Andrew voted yes. And since we are a patriarchy around here, we Andrew got his way. That's the way it always is. Andrew gets his way. But here it goes. Skid marks are brown, pea stains are yellow. Thinking of Trump, harsh as my mellow. Okay. So now we bring back Ciiff, and I shall turn on his mic, which is I may regret. So Ciiff.
Hello, can you hear me?
I'm going to leave you now while you introduce your guests, and I'm
going to leave that poem and then run away
backstage.
Well, what else do you expect Bob to do after that?
Yeah, that poem. Yeah. Okay. Good morning, everyone out there in, I don't know, internet land. Good morning, poets. Thank you for joining me. I'm your host, Ciiff Winnig, and today's topic is poetry as resistance.
Yes.
Now, those of you who like Star Trek might say resistance is futile, and those of you who like The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy might say resistance is useless. But as we know, in the latter case, Vogons wrote terrible poetry, and the Borg did not appreciate poetry. So we're going to circumnavigate both Vogon Destructor Fleet guards and Borg drones and talk about poetry as resistance. And I have with me three wonderful poets, all of whom, coincidentally, are in Alternative Liberties, out recently by B-Cube Press. Oh, thank you for having that. That is the Mirror Universe version, and there's the regular universe version. Yeah, you can do a little flip thing under the gear thing that says flip or mirror, unmirror. Anyway, there you go. My gosh, Nancy flipped. So there you go. So I'm going to give our viewers a little bit of information about our poets before we start. And I'm going to take it from the bio section of the book, because that's kind of fun. Nancy Jane Moore is the author of the fantasy novel For the Good of the Realm, and it's a good one, and the science fiction novel The Weave. Those are both Aqueduct, right?
Right.
With Aqueduct Press. Along with other books. Her short fiction and poetry have appeared in a variety of magazines and anthologies. Born and raised in Texas, she spent many years in Washington, D.C., and now lives with her sweetheart, Jim, who is a total sweetheart, in Oakland, California. She's on good terms with crows. Perhaps she'll tell us more about that. She is, let's see, also, you don't mention your bio, you're also a retired lawyer. So if we have legal questions about poetry, then you're the person to ask.
Right, because I know so much about
you do legal poetry.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
And I've known Nancy since the 20th century, or as my kids will say, the 1900s. That's true. Oh. Andrew L. Roberts is an old poet in search of a razor, and judging from today, he hasn't found one yet. Not to trim his stubble, but to carve carefully into his exquisitely crafted epics, which he doesn't mention in the bio, so I will mention. Durham and Rose, hopefully to have a new edition this year. Durham and Rose is an book-length epic poem about a young World War I soldier during and after the war. And I think it reads like Wilfred Owen writ large and is just beautiful. He is also the author of, I think, count them, three poetry collections and a bunch of short stories, and hopefully soon collecting those as well. What's the latest poetry collection? Is it the Nightmares?
Well, the latest published one is Writing the Nightmares. Yeah.
Writing the Nightmare, yes. And anyway, so he says he carves his, uses a razor to carve, there you go, in his exquisitely crafted epics, all of which are much longer than this bio. I forgot that line. All right. And finally, we have Stephanie Weippert. Ages ago, a sci-fi convention sent out an anthology call. They wanted slug stories. Now, is that some kind of code for something, or is it really stories about slugs?
It was a story about slug because that particular convention had a slug wearing a little rainbow beanie hat as its mascot. So it was going to have Tales of the Slug. And of course, I didn't know what I was doing. And I wrote something and I sent it in. And of course, it was rejected. But I had so much fun writing a silly little slug story that I kept writing. And so here I am.
So thank landed vertebrates for Stephanie's
Yeah, I
writing
write
career.
because of a slug. I write
Yeah.
because of a slug.
Are you familiar with the Canadian band Doug and the Slugs? They are wonderful.
No, I
They're
haven't.
absolutely
I'll have to
wonderful.
look them
Anyway,
up.
yes. One of the records I have of the vinyl records I have of them, the record sleeve has a cutout of slug enhancer, sound enhancers, which are two slug-shaped things you can cut out, and it says nailed or stapled to side of head, and they're supposed to enhance, in front of your ears to the slug listening experience. I did not try that, so
No,
but because I wouldn't have a record sleeve anymore for my record. So anyway, the idea tickled Stephanie's funny bone, so she wrote her very first story, which she just told us about, and it got rejected. Boo! But the writing bug bit. Yay! Although that sounds a little painful. And with her hubby's enthusiastic support, yay, hubby! Well
yes.
done. She's been writing ever since. A decade later, she has a website and a handful of pieces in small press anthologies and 2 out-of-print books. She will republish real soon now.
RSN.
If you know anything about engineering, real soon now is code for. Anyway.
Don't bet on it.
Yeah. All right. So we'll get that project done real soon now. Thank you all for coming and reminding our in-studio audience and future generations watching this on mental vision or whatever it is we have in the future, that the topic is poetry as resistance. Good morning, Jenna Hannon Moore, who is on our.
Yay, we have an audience.
We do have an
Thank
audience.
You.
We have several people.
We have actually a number of people in the audience. Andrew J. Lucas has given us a physics formula on resistance, which is electrical physics. All right, so I thought one of the things we would talk about to start with is the book Alternative Liberties. Cue somebody holding up Alternative Liberties. Thank you, Nancy. And talk about how you came to write, how you came to decide to write poetry in a book which is about the second-term Trump presidency and how that's likely to go, and resistance as well as failing to resist in their stories about all these things and essays. And so, but you guys didn't write stories for the book; you wrote poems. So let's talk a little bit about that and where you came up with that.
Okay, well, if you don't mind me starting first, guys.
I do not mind. And tell us
Okay,
what it has to do with slugs, by the way.
Oh, well, the slugs are in the past.
Ah,
Yeah,
they're
I'm
democratic
not.
slugs.
Now quit distracting me. Anyway,
It's my job.
I decided to write a poem because I was just so frustrated with people online going, "Oh, don't worry, they can't do that. The courts will stop them. They can't do that. The Constitution says they can't. They can't. They can't. They can't." And I just got so sick and tired of it that I put all the frustration into this poem saying that, yeah, they've already done it. It's already happened. It's so we've got to, it can happen again. Don't tell me it can't happen. It already happened. Which I guess I'm giving away my whole poem, but if you want me to read it now, Cliff, I can do
I
so.
would love for you to read your poem, Stephanie.
Okay. Thank you very much. Okay. They can't do that here. The Constitution won't allow it. You say this so confidently, secure in your race and class, but ask an older Japanese about when FDR ignored our Constitution, rounded them up into concentration camps for the horrible crime of their race. It can't happen here. Our courts won't allow it. Ask a Cherokee about the courts when they walked the Trail of Tears. Crystal Night can't ever happen here. But ask a Black in Tulsa what happened in 1921 when their neighborhoods burned to ash. Don't tell me it can't happen here because it already has.
Brava. That was a great reading, by the way.
Mhm.
It was a very powerful poem.
Oh, thank you. Again, I'm just so frustrated with people that don't bother to learn or remember anything about our history, going, well, we're okay. It can't happen here. It can, it has, and it might again if we don't stop it.
Yeah, leading up to the election, there were a lot of protesters and activists wearing handmade outfits from The Handmaid's Tale, both the TV show and the book by Margaret Atwood. And one of the very fair criticisms leveled against The Handmaid's Tale is, oh, it's just a book about things happening to white women that have happened to women of color throughout history, right? And
Yeah.
your poem reminded me of that stark reality, and so it was very moving in that way, and
Thank you.
spot on target. So
Yeah.
cool, yeah. Sometimes a truth is so hard and so overwhelming that the only way to approach it is through verse, right?
Yeah.
Because prose just doesn't quite get there. So speaking of that, Andrew.
Oh.
Yes, Stephanie.
Oh, I was just going to say that poetry, I've found, can carry heavier emotions than prose can often because of the way it's structured, and it doesn't have all the the grammar and everything to cover it up. It's the raw words and emotions, and what you said about the emotions and carrying the heavy things. Yeah, I think that's why it works better as a poem than if I had tried to make a short story out of this.
Or an essay, or I mean,
Or
because
something,
I could
yeah.
easily see an essay, right?
Oh,
But I
yeah.
think the poem is more, it goes direct to the heart,
Yeah.
right? And so it circumvents a lot of defensive walls or perceptual filters that the reader might have. Right?
Yeah.
So Andrew, you have not one but two poems in our book.
Yeah.
Would
The thing
you
I
like
like
to
about-
read one?
The thing I like about, let me say this first. The thing I like about poetry is that the best poems, which are the hardest, are the ones that make the reader or the listener flip and see something differently they wouldn't have seen. You know, the first poem that I sent is actually the second poem in the book. And Cliff has the dubious honor of having seen the original version and saying, "Do not submit that. You will have a knock on your door." So I had to rewrite it. And
Yeah. So I mean, that actually happened to a friend of mine.
yeah,
Who posted a political cartoon, reposted a political cartoon to LiveJournal, and the Secret Service came and visited him. This was during the Bush years.
So
yeah,
Really?
and they were like, "So, is that a threat?" And he was like, "No, it's a political cartoon," and he took it down, and he was very good.
But
yeah.
the best poems are more subtle, and they just change your perspective. I'm still working at that. A lot of my poems are just working out things, working out anger, and trying to shift it into a more productive manner. The first poem that I wrote that's in the book that I wrote second was actually written for Cliff when he first suggested doing the podcast as Poetry as Resistance. And this one is not my favorite poem, but it does the job, I think. Resistance may be futile, but resistance is all I have. 4 years of Donald Trump has created a deep resistance in my flesh. The very mention of him gives me hives. But art is my inoculation now, and crafted verse of searing words, the vaccination against his infection. Art is my resistance. Art is our resistance. So hear me now, you artists, authors, essayists, and poets. Art is our resistance. Our words, our paint, our songs will be our swords and shields, our bandages, and our comfort. Do what you do and resist for those without the means to resist. Do not render yourselves futile. Art be our resistance.
Hell yeah.
And my problem with it after I wrote it, it feels a little like something from a propaganda pamphlet.
No, it's a call to arms.
Yeah.
And I actually fought to try and get that as the opening piece in the book because it was such a great call to arms. Yeah, I know how you feel about that. It's not as subtle as it could be, but I think there's a time for subtle and there's a time for hell yeah. And this is that time. Yeah, so a little bit here is appearing on the screen thanks to the elf behind the scenes named Bob. And Jenna, I would say that, I hope we're going to get actually to talk about songs as well, because there's a long history of resistance songs from like Woody Guthrie to Latin American folk singers to all this stuff that we will at least touch on at some point during the hour.
1,
Okay.
2, 3. What do we find? Sorry, my bad.
Yeah, no, that was good. All right, so and like I said, Andrew has 2 poems. I'm hoping that we can hear his other poem a little bit later in the hour. But first, I want to turn to Nancy, who has been writing either haiku or senryu, and I'd like you to talk about the difference between them for years now. And some of those poems and they're all 17 syllables in English, and some of those poems end with "not civilized yet." She has a whole series that periodically graces her social media with "not civilized yet," and she picked 5 of those to bundle up and send to us, which we were like, yes, please. So she had indicated that she might want to read either some or all of the ones in the book or others that are not in the book but might be on similar themes. So I'm going to let Nancy tell us what she's going to read.
Well, I will get to that. I will observe that from your original question, I started out when I heard the call to write a story. And one of the theories I have developed, I've been thinking about this all week. I think it's harder to write fiction starting from a political point of view instead of letting the politics seep into your fiction. That I find that much harder without it turning into a polemic. I just think it's difficult to do. And Whereas with poetry, I think because poetry is so often with metaphor, uses so many different tools, and while fiction uses those, it uses them. They're just very different forms, and I think it's easier to come with your anger into poetry and write something that is not just so much rage that nobody else can read it. I think it's harder. I think it's harder with fiction. I've read a lot of fiction where people started with their political views and have written some, and it's like, I can't start there. It rarely works well to start there. I mean, that other people are obviously different. So it's Cliff said. I reworked some of the Sinru. The difference between haiku is very traditional in terms of being usually about nature and having the turn. Sinru should have the same turn, but it has it's got more room for humor. It's got more room for political commentary. It's more, to me, it's a more diverse version of it in terms of, it's basically about subject matter. And we're talking about the subtleties of Japanese poetry, which are, have got their own Japanese culture aspects that I will not pretend to be good at understanding, but they're there. I mean, if you look at any aspect, I mean, you've got the art form where you take the broken thing and mend it with gold, and I mean, the Japanese are good at that in the way that many other cultures are not. So yeah, I've been writing the Sinru for 10 years now. And it started out, and it still is. It's what I do. I get up in the morning, most mornings, and what's on my mind, what's eating at me, what's getting me. Every once in a while, they will actually end up being more like a traditional haiku. They'll be about nature. Obviously, in recent years, a lot of them become political because it's what's getting at me. And so, if you want me, I'll read these. These are slight reworkings of some that were there that seemed relevant to the subject. And this is short, so because it's 5 Sinru. Not civilized yet. The election proved what I've been saying for years. Not civilized yet. Grifters, oligarchs, and extreme Christians in charge. Not civilized yet. Cops and presidents can get away with it all. Not civilized yet. Control all women. Who cares if old people die? Not civilized yet. We're fighting once more for the rights we thought we'd won. Not civilized yet.
Bravo. Yeah, you picked a good set and put them in a good order. Like I was we had multiple editors on the book, and I was the editor for actually pretty much, I think, all the poetry. Because I said, oh, I can do that. And on that one, I was like, no notes. That was just spectacular. And I've told Nancy in the past that I would love to see like a collection of some of her poetry as a coffee table book, or like a little kind of poetry books they have at the desk at the bookstore.
Yep.
Front desk to like grab you on the way out. So I'm still hoping for that some publisher will see this video and realize, oh my God, we have a poetry genius who writes short.
It will happen most obviously if somebody does that, but I've been waiting for that as a writer all my life, for somebody to fall in love with my work and just take care of it for me.
Wouldn't that be nice? That's like the ideal.
That would be awesome. Yeah, that would be really awesome.
So before we move on subject wise, Andrew, did you want to read your other poem, or do you want to save it to the end, or what? How would you like to do that?
Actually, I have a poem that's not in the book that might be good. In times like these, poets are carpenters, balancing precariously upon one foot, with tools in their belts and in their hands, the steel rule clamped sharp between their teeth, grimacing, squinting into the sun, as they swing their hammers, driving nails into a cloudless blue sky, one after another, raising the scaffold of words upon which they themselves may soon be hanged in times like these.
Woo.
Bravo. Well done.
I wrote that because, I've been just pounding out angry anti-Trump poems, and some of them are not very subtle. And it occurred to me at some point, yeah, I might get in trouble with the ogre. But more importantly, I got worried because my wife is a Japanese citizen. She's a legal resident alien, but what's legal today is up for grabs in the country.
Yeah.
So I started thinking about repercussions, and I wrote that poem. And there's that subtle dance between, well, I'm writing poetry and I'm writing subversive poetry.
Yeah, and the fear and worry that you have. I have of what kind of a follower, if I may, Cliff.
Absolutely.
Okay, this actually has to do with, he mentioned the fear. And I kind of this is kind of like a prayer for protection, because we're all just one or two executive orders away from being in deep trouble. As oh shoot, there. Okay, sorry, my computer is being difficult. Sorry, there it is. Okay. I think I'm going to call this resistance prayer. May God show mercy to every soul. For Musk, our treasury, he has stole. Hashim, shelter under wing. For Trump is vowed to be our king. Allah be my refuge, please, above, below, inside. When ICE raids neighborhoods, help me hide. Creator divine, help me withstand turbulent troubles across this land. So,
Yeah. Excellent. That reminds me of a lot of the Psalms that were like attributed to David when he was hiding in caves from Saul's army and stuff like that.
oh, well, thank you for the compliment.
Yeah, so it's in that vein, right?
Yeah.
But modernized. Yeah, so I mean, one of the advantages I think that poets have in resistance in the current regime is that Trump doesn't read. So a lot of his goons don't read anyway. They burn books, but they don't read books. So I guess they kind of huff books. That's about it. But so that provides a little more safety than it does for, say, YouTube commenters who might get rounded up first. Like maybe us right now because we're on this YouTube video.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so I have referred to the writers who submitted stories, essays, and poems to Alternative Liberties as brave. And yes, I think all the writers are brave. They're defying, the potential winds of executive orders coming out of Washington, right? I mean, and some of a couple of the writers, I think that we have one or two are Canadian and Australian, and so we have people who are outside the U.S., but we also have, red state writers and purple state writers and blue state writers. So there's a lot of, we got Jim Wright in Florida, right? So,
yeah.
He's constantly putting himself out there and risking
has been. Though, bravery is an interesting concept. When I got out of law school, I opened a law office, which in respect and and now I look back, it's like, that was a really stupid thing to do. There were better things I could have done. And somebody said, oh, you're so brave. And it's now, I don't know. This is the whole reason I did this. I did this so I could have a way of being self-employed. Like I said, it was not probably a good plan, but it was a sort of plan. And I feel the same way about writing this stuff. I don't really have a choice. I mean, I write essays, I blog, I do this sort of thing. I'm not good at shutting up. And in fact, I was recently writing and thinking, all the things of subtlety when people talk about all the romantic resistance, which I'm actually kind of tired of the romance of resistance. It's like, and all the stuff that spies are good at, and the resistors, you've got these wonderful resistor stories out of France, out of Germany, of what people did. And it's like, I really suck at that. I'm really bad. I'm never going to be good at luring the Nazi off. I'm never going to be good at smuggling something by somebody. I can't do that. All I can do is speak out, which of course, I guess that means that in some regimes you get shot first, but or worse. But I'm mostly saying that's just not. I can't do that. I can look back and edit my words before I put them out in public, which I think everybody should do for lots of reasons. And one of them is, did I say that badly? Am I how is that, how does that read? And some of that, some of the reality of what goes on, as Andrew was talking about, is going to come out. But I mean, I don't feel particularly brave about this because I don't really feel like it's just this is what I do. This is what I have to do in some manner. And I'm not good. I'm never going to be good at the sneaky side. I mean, I've read Stan Robinson's Ministry for the Future, which is a hopeful book. But we were discussing, and there are people in there who are doing things that the people who are in official positions are just saying, I don't want to know any more about that, but there are people who are very good at that. And there may be realities in which we need people who are very good at that. I would prefer it all to be more direct. I'm better at direct. But
Poetry can be very direct.
poetry can be very direct, but poetry is also subtle. It's meta. You use so much more metaphor in poetry than even in fiction, and so you can give somebody an incredible insult and it can go right over a lot of people's heads, and because you have to understand the concepts that underlie it. And if you're talking to people who don't understand that sort of thing, they might miss it. But I'm not suggesting that I could write poetry subtle enough to skewer everybody without I'm not that's not my style. That's not who I am.
Yeah, you remind me of, we're in a fortunate time right now, in that there's a despot trying to come to power, but he hasn't fully manifested. And I'm thinking of
He's getting closer every day.
Someone mentioned, but let me finish. Someone mentioned music, resistance music, and Pete Seeger recorded an old German song, which is one of my favorites, Die Gedanken sind frei, right? My thoughts freely flower. And what's very, very interesting about that song is it's an old German folk song. And on Hitler's birthday at a concentration camp, the commandant wanted the Jews to sing a song for Hitler. And one of the guys stood up and sang Die Gedanken sind frei. Which I won't recite all the lyrics, but go read the lyrics translated in English, and they're just brilliant. I shall not surrender to duke or dictator. My thoughts freely fly. Die Gedanken sind frei, right? But to do that in a concentration camp, and Sophie, I don't know how to pronounce her name, Scholl, the woman from the White Rose resistance group in Nazi Germany, her father was in prison, and she stood outside the prison playing that song on a flute. And she was later executed. We haven't got to that point, but so we're lucky, but it's something that may manifest in our own future.
Yeah. Well, to go to books and stories. I mean, they use song in which one of the Hunger Game. Was it the second Hunger Games book that they
Are
used?
you talking about the hanging tree or whatever?
Yeah, the hanging tree. Yeah,
Yeah.
because
I think it was in book 2 or 3. I can't remember.
I don't remember. It's been so long since I read the books. The whole arc of the story is kind of blended together, but they used it in the Resistance used it in their advertising, I guess, for lack of a better word, in their propaganda, getting her to sing some of the Hanging Tree and overlaying that with what the Capitol had done. And music and lyrics and poetry are if not twins, if not the same thing, they're twins. And our poems can be used a lot of different ways, because I looked it up, and during World War II, French resistance had a cipher that depended upon a poem, like one or two lines of poem, and you needed to know that line of poem to be able to decipher the code. Yeah. So, and
I like that.
and I thought that was really cool, because that's a way, it's a way to be useful, even though, we're just artists. We're not fighters. We're not soldiers, or we're not somebody's likely to throw a Molotov cocktail, but we can write 2 lines of poetry so that the resistance cells can communicate with each other without the bad guys knowing.
Yeah, we're bards, not fighters or magic users, right?
That's a good way to put it.
Unless you're Scottish, then you're a warrior bard.
Right.
Yes.
So I was thinking about "This Land Is Your Land" by Woody Guthrie. There's a verse that I was not taught in school as a kid, because they used to teach us these songs, and that verse is, "As I was walking, I saw a sign there, and that sign said, 'No trespassing.' But on the other side, it didn't say nothing. Now that side was made for you and me." So that is like incitement, right? It's deliberately pointing out that you can, here's some space, you could stick it to the man. So and then of course there's it's always a struggle between the state and the resistance. The lyrics to Johnny I Hardly Knew Ya got changed, which is this anti-war song, got changed to When Johnny Comes Marching Home, which is this pro-war song, right? And that was the version I first learned.
Woody Guthrie is amazing, because his songs are 70 years old, and he writes a song that could be played right now, Deportee.
Right.
Well, he's not the only one from that era to write resistance songs, because when I took a history of the Vietnam War, we got into the resistance movements, and that's where I did the 1, 2, 3, 4. What are we fighting for? Don't ask me, I don't give a damn. Next stop is Vietnam. Yeah, I know. Do you remember who said that, Andrew?
Country Joe McDonald.
Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah. So, and at one point I kind of filked, if you guys know what filk is, I filked those lyrics to lampoon the MAGA movement. 1, 2, 3, 4. What are we fighting for? Just look at my cat, my friend. We're storming Congress. Now I forgot I forgot it. But
forget your own filk.
Yeah, I do. It's like, Frank Hayes, go away.
That's why we write that stuff down. Anyway.
Yes. I will stop now. You can take over.
For those watching at home who don't know what filk is, it's folk music, allegedly named from a typo, because the O and the I are next to each other on a keyboard. But it's folk music rewritten with new lyrics, often having to do with science fiction or fantasy. It's in
Yes.
a certain community in the science fiction community.
It's related to what They Might Be Giants and Weird Al does, except this is folk music. So
Yeah, although a lot of folk is sort of other genres now more than it's folk,
yeah,
but
well,
but it's the classic folk is someone with a guitar.
yes.
So
Yeah, someone, Jenna, in the chat, or the audience chat, mentioned Phil Oakes, who, if we're going to go back to the Vietnam War era, which is where I start with all this. Yeah, Phil Oakes is one of the, and maybe one of you can remember something that just comes up. I'm sure I could, but off the spot, I'm not coming up with a lyric just yet.
Love me, I'm a liberal. Was one
Yeah,
of
there's a good one. There's a good one. But there were so many, and the very much the from the Vietnam War era, the protests were always entangled with music. The music of the time was very political, including the very commercial music. Not just Joan Baez, for example. Bob Dylan's early music was so much protest, with God on Our Side, for example, and
well, the times they are changing.
the times they are
Yeah.
changing. Blowing in the Wind, for that matter. Going
Peter,
back
Paul,
to
and Mary, they were very
well,
politically
that's a
active.
Dylan song.
Yeah, but they did a
popularized.
version of it.
That was much better because they could sing.
Yeah, well, that was a lot of people covering Dylan. There was Ohio by Crosby, Stills, Nash and
Oh,
Young,
yeah.
which was in response to the Kent State Massacre, and given the technology of the time, basically released instantly. It was like a few weeks after the event that the song came out. They wrote, they recorded, they pressed records, they distributed the pressed records to radio stations and record stores, and they got that single out in a matter of weeks, which is just it is a Herculean effort equivalent to getting our book out in 65 days, for those who don't know. It takes months, if not a year, to put out an anthology. There is everything from designing the call for submissions, which we did do in advance, to putting out the call for submissions, to the reading period, reading all the submissions, to then taking the ones you've bought and editing those, and then compiling them into a book, doing the page layout, cover design, editing, bios, all of that, and then getting it ready for production. And B-Cube Press decided to do this book on election night and got it out by inauguration 65 days later, which is about 3 times as fast as a fast book. Right? So we had 6 editors, including yours truly, in parallel, which is the only way, it's like parallel computing is the only way we could do it, which is, and frequent meetings over Zoom or Facebook Live, whatever, some kind of Zoom-like thing, and talking about it and figuring out what we're doing next. It was quite the coordination. So it's very impressive that Bob was able to coordinate that. But Ohio was released in a similar crazy fast production schedule for music at the time. Like now you can just go on YouTube and do your rough version with the same day, but back then that was with the centralized distribution of vinyl was a very, very different technological environment.
And especially at the time when they would have been, they were already pretty big stars by that point.
Yeah. That's why they could do it so fast.
Well, that's why they could do it so fast. But it's also the interesting thing about that time was how many people who were major would do something, if not like that, something similar. How many would show up at a protest and sing, that sort of thing. It was very entwined in that movement. Which is, poetry and resistance, I think, are just completely interrelated. I don't, maybe more so, but in a lot of other, whereas, essays in fiction, even, I think are often more reflective. I mean, there's possibly the best book that, in my mind, that ever came out of the Vietnam War was Elizabeth Hand Scarborough's The Healer's War, which is a brilliant science fiction book, and better, I think, than most of the other more like the World War II. But of course, the World War II novels of Joseph Heller and Norman Mailer and people like that came out way after the war, and that's partly the process of publishing, but it's also the process of writing something like that. It takes more time, and I'm not saying that poetry doesn't take a lot of time, but there's a way you can do poetry relatively quickly. I mean, probably a poem 10 years later with some reflection might end up being a better poem at that point. But it is something that you can react with in the moment in a way that I think is just harder. I think it's just harder in other formats. And song even more so. And Jenna is also in the. We got an awfully smart audience here.
We do. Yeah, there's some great comments.
Commenting that music can become a collective expression of resistance, and that's very true. I mean, with everything going on. So, I mean, it was occurring to me that this morning that comics and cartoons can also do this more easily than some other forms. And we've also got incredible histories of periods of time that are absolutely relevant, but they, by definition, are after the fact. Even though Heather Cox Richardson is trying to write the history as we go, bless her, and may she continue to do so.
Yeah, so I'll also point out, like, there's some someone pointed out, let's see, more recent. I lost the sidebar, but more recent songs. I remember Peter, Paul, and Mary in the '80s came out with El Salvador, which was a protest song about Reagan's military actions in general South America, but El Salvador, and the thrust of which is we need to get the hell out of there. What are we even doing? Because he had all this like South American war stuff going on. But I'm going to go back a little earlier, and Merle Travis wrote 16 Tons in 1946, and it was about coal miners. And for those who might not know, that there was a system which I think the current round of oligarchs are trying to recreate, whereby slavery was achieved not through legal means, but through economic means. They would pay the workers in company script rather than
which was
cash.
Only good at the company store.
Only good at the company store, and the prices at the company store were fixed so that in order to survive and feed one's family, you wound up not having enough company script to cover necessities. And so every day you were a little more in debt to the company that you worked as a coal miner. So you'd have these coal miner towns, and the only store was the company store, and the only cash was the company script, So basically they were not paying their workers, they were feeding their workers, and they died in debt, right? And so I'm not going to sing the whole song, but I'm going to sing the chorus because I love this song. So here we go. You load 16 tons, and what do you get? Another day older and deeper in debt. St. Peter, don't you call me, because I can't go. I owe my soul to the company store. Yay, thank you. That was
I hope you don't mind that I like the song too, and I hope you don't mind.
It's a great song. Yeah, so I hope members of the studio audience were singing along there. Anyway, Merle Travis, 1946,
and recorded by Tennessee Ernie Ford.
Yes, and lots of other people, including Johnny Cash.
What happened?
I'm sorry, Stephanie. What was that?
What's going on here?
I think Stephanie is experiencing technical difficulties.
Before we get too far off of music, I was just thinking since we brought up the patriarchy in the beginning, let me bring up the feminists, because the feminist poetry of the 70s was incredible. I mean, and actually, if you go back and look, the first wave feminist poetry is pretty incredible too. But I knew people. There were all these women's music festivals. There still are some, but there were a lot of women's music festivals, and you would have people like Holly Near, Chris Williamson, Meg Christian, the various and of the same genre, and also blending over back and forth. Sweet Honey and the Rock, going back to the tradition of the civil rights movement and so forth. I mean, feminism has always been intersectional. The thing is, there was so much music, and the lyrics were so powerful. And again, this is not the music of the marching in the political marches so much as the music people got together to restore themselves to what we're dealing with. I mean, we can't talk about poetry without talking about music when we're talking resistance, for sure.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so the Michigan Women's Music Festival is, I think, the big one of that era.
And it's still going on.
Well, don't we still have the Lilith Fair on the west side of the country?
But that was a different animal, right? I mean, I attended Lilith Fair. So
okay, I thought it was a feminine
it is
singer.
Yeah, but it was a mixed gender space, unlike Michigan Women's Music
okay.
Festival, which was not.
My apologies.
And it was in I saw the Lilith Fair at the Greek Theater at Cal Berkeley. So Sarah McLaughlin and people like that. It was really.
I just remember the Indigo Girls getting their start at the Lilith Fair, or at least that's when they made big.
Yeah.
And some of their music is quite along what Nancy was talking about.
Sure.
Yeah, Roberta thinks in Michigan, and I think it's different now, but a friend of mine has gone to some recent things in Michigan that are basically a reinvention of if that one ended, but I think it's been revitalized lately. Friends of mine there's still stuff going on.
Now my brain is being overwhelmed by all these folk singers I used to love back in the 80s, like June Tabor, and Farron and Kate Wolf, and it's like, wow. Thanks.
Then you're going to go back and hit the Irish resistance in the music of the Irish.
Patriot Games.
Yeah. The wearing of the green, you can go way back with that stuff.
I think Patriot Games is my favorite anti-war song.
Patriot Games was a song. I thought it was a movie.
Well,
eventually it was a movie
with the lyrics in it somewhere. Yeah, it's a great song.
Okay, I'll have to look it up.
So one of the great, speaking of movies, anti-war movies, is of course Casablanca, and the most powerful scene in the whole movie is the song fight in the bar between the. Yes, I know you cringe because of the lyrics of the French song, but it in that case the lyrics were not important, right? What was important was the vibe, which is interesting.
Always important. I mean,
they are yet I give you Casablanca.
Well, but the Marseillaise is something, and I've seen this on a meme and social media lately. The Marseillaise echoes the French Revolution. Obviously, it's rooted in the French Revolution, and the words are very.
We will water our fields with the blood of the impure.
Yes,
my national anthem.
But the meme I saw on social media recently was They want Berlin 1933. Let's give them France 1787. I think, if I've got the date right. And I mean, that's not my resistance, or at least I hope not. But it is part of the history of this. And if we're looking at literature of any kind in resistance, it goes way back. Well, Cliff was quoting Psalms earlier. We're talking way
That's
before
3,000 years
at least. Yeah,
Yeah,
I'm sure there must be from other cultures of the time very similar things.
I like the Nancy Jane Moore reframe better.
Oh yeah,
not civilized yet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Stephanie,
I would like us to. I must admit, the reason that comes up is because I read stuff. I read incredible stuff. It's like, we have all this capacity, and here we are screaming like toddlers or shooting people. It's like, no, we know more than that now. How can we not be civilized yet?
Some of us know more than that now.
Yeah.
And some of us have abandoned that. That's the problem.
Well, one of the things I've read online is that the sign of civilization isn't what we produce. It's a healed bone on a cadaver, because the fact that somebody else took care of them so that the bone could heal, that's the sign of civilization, not the wheel, not the agriculture, not anything else. But we're civilized when we take care of each other.
Yep.
I think that's a great note to end the discussion on right there.
Yes.
So I'm going to ask, before Bob comes back, I'm going to ask my authors if there's anything they would like to plug or mention. It doesn't have to be a book they're in. It could be your favorite charity, your favorite kind of nonviolent resistance, whatever it is. So whoever wants to take it away, take it away.
Okay, I'm going to plug my Patreon account. The easiest way to get to it is stephanieweippert.com. You can see it spelled down in the bottom here, or I think I can put it in the chat. No, that's a private chat.
Yeah.
Cliff,
that's without the L?
Yes, without here. I'll put it in the let's see. Yeah.
Because Bob can transfer it to the public.
Yeah, let me put it. I am copying it now. Okay, so yes, I need all the patrons I can get. And the lowest rank to help me is only $1. And that way you get a story and my extra poems that I post around the web. It's the one place you can go to see everything that I do, instead of just if you happen to follow me on the same social media.
Well,
thank
you.
Cool. Next.
To jump in, my books are at Aqueduct Press, and Aqueduct Press is one of those wonderful book places that keeps books in print. So you can find my books and many other wonderful books at aqueductpress.com. It's not hard to find. I blog regularly at treehousewriters.com, and that's frequently political. That's usually essays. But I would say, actually, on the point of resistance, one of the things that I have recently done is a small group of us, about 5 or 6 of us, are getting together every couple of weeks, and we're not planning demonstrations. There's lots of people doing stuff like that. We're supporting each other in doing things, in participating. Maybe we'll go together to a march. Maybe we'll come up with ideas that the other people haven't thought of. We're kind of a support group of people who want to do something active and need some kind of support. So I recommend we do this in person. I recommend that you find some people who are in your vicinity and get together if you're not already doing that. That hanging out with other people of similar minds is very helpful. And now we're over, and Andrew hasn't spoken.
And drinking coffee or tea.
Yes.
Yes.
Very important component. Yes, Andrew.
Well, since we're over time, I want to just read a poem.
Excellent. Are you going to read your other poem from Alternative
No,
Liberties?
this is something that's written out of need. I think we'll all agree with a new language. I need a new language, one in which I can find peace. And the whisper of feathers and the secret sound of sunlight opening the vermilion petals of a rose. I need to walk with angels softly and barefoot on green grass and through autumnal leaves, in sacred places without rage or fear. Let me lose my voice, make me mute and free me of the painful words that I would speak today in my anguish and in my hate. Remove all my nouns except for love. Remove my verbs except for love. Prune away all my adjectives, leaving only good. Then replace all the others with the new words of a healing language, gentle upon my tongue and lips. I need to forget the things that I have learned in the absence of forgiveness and grace. I need a new language.
Bravo. That is a beautiful way to end the discussion. So I'm going to ruin it by suggesting that if you really want to do resistance, you just close your eyes, relax, and go, Om. Electrician joke.
You know, Cliff, you
Yes.
know, resistance is the plight of the homeless.
Ooh.
You asked for
Ooh.
that, friend.
I did. So I will point out, Nancy mentioned earlier Elizabeth Ann Scarborough and her wonderful Vietnam War novel, The Healer's War.
The Healer's War.
Elizabeth Ann Scarborough is also in Alternative Liberties with a very different kind of story, including a dragon and a golden toilet. So, yes. So, could someone hold up Alternative Liberties one last time? If you want some of the poems that have been read, and also an Andrew L. Roberts poem that was not read today, and Elizabeth Ann Scarborough story, and a bunch of other great stuff, and a kind of a way of dealing with the horror of our life by under the current regime with speculative fiction and essays and poetry about the horror of our life under the current regime as it might play out. I mean, it's a good kind of inoculation, as Andrew said. All right, Bob, welcome back.
Hey, and speaking of poets who have made their mark in BQ Press, I would not want to leave out Jane Yolen.
Oh yeah.
I mean, I don't know how well known she is for her poetry, but she is a spectacular poet. Her and Charles, I believe, up there in Massachusetts, put out prolific amounts of wonderful poetry, and we've been pleased to have her in a number of B-Cubed publications. Now,
and she's also written 10,847 books or something like that.
Yeah.
If you look over there in the links right above where I posted Stephanie Weippert's links, you will see a book that we did a couple years ago called The Protest Diaries. It is amazing what during the Black Lives Matter protests I spent a little time participating, and down in Portland with the protests down there, where you talked about the woman standing out there with a picture of her father protesting her father's imprisonment in Nazi Germany. A former Navy officer walked up to a couple of officers during the Black Lives Matter protests who were whopping up on people and said, "This ain't the way it should be." And their response was they broke his arm, his hand, and beat the crap out of him. And this was a former Navy officer walking up wearing his Naval Academy sweatsuit. These people, if we don't stand up, and by standing up, some of us are going to get whacked on the head. I don't encourage it. I don't have any intention to it. But it is a sobering moment when you're on your knees having the tear gas washed out of your eyes, to realize that you got to stand up. I mean, and it's not going to be easy, and there's no guarantee that we're going to win.
Yeah.
And it's so I just put the book up there called The Protest Diaries. It was inspired by what went on I saw going on down in Portland. And Karen Anderson's got a story in it, you may know. And it was edited by a lady that works out at, or at the time, worked out at the college. And it's described as stories, essays, and histories of protests and protesters. The importance of protesters cannot be understated. America is a nation born of protesters. To that fact, we owe our soul, be it to the abolitionist, the suffragette, the civil rights marcher, the pink pussy hat, or the Black Lives Matter stalwarts. The true conscience of America is demonstrated by these heroes. They are the power to move the line and eventually pushes our country across it to achieve moral victories. It's a great little book, and I will tell you this, guys, this ain't over by a long shot.
No.
And it may very well be that our children are the ones that see the recovery of the nation if it happens. But I can only say that I firmly believe that the objective right now is to suppress the vote to the point that it no longer impacts. Because if the man is president and you get a majority in Congress, he has demonstrated willingness to rule by royal decree.
Yep.
And there's a protest here in town tomorrow. And there's a big one in Washington, D.C. on President's Day. If you can go, unfortunately, I am on a road and cannot be at our protest here tomorrow. But yeah, we just gotta keep at it. And if your protest is writing a poem, you guys have done some wonderful work there. If your protest is hosting a Facebook page, if your protest is being a protester on the streets, or being a protester in your living room, being a protester is sometimes nothing more than not remaining silent.
Yes.
When you're standing there and somebody says something that's absolutely wrong, I'll use the example of about the 50 million condoms. There's when a stranger or a person is in a public arena speaking bullshit, there is nothing wrong with standing and saying that's bullshit.
Yes.
And that is a protest. And so, however you're comfortable, whatever you do, remember that you are that thin line between fascism in this country and a hope for a future where a hungry child will get fed, vaccines will be administered. We won't have another 500 measles cases showing up down in Texas. Because how many? I wrote a piece on Facebook one time not too long ago that talked about, the vaccines, the ending of USAID, and the kids. How many kids are going to die of tuberculosis? Tuberculosis kills something like 10,000 people a year internationally, or 1,000 people a year. I forget. I think it's 10,000, and almost 600 a year in the United States. And it's absolutely preventable. And we're working on making it extinct, much like smallpox and polio are nearly extinct. But in the administration today, they are turning it backwards. They're bringing back polio. They're bringing back smallpox. They're bringing back tuberculosis. And I don't know what the body count's going to be, but I'll start believing our media isn't part of the issue when I start seeing body counts on the evening news from how many people died today of measles, how many people died today in this country of tuberculosis, how many new polio cases, and pointing their finger at the U.S. government programs that were developed to fight these, because you needed a government program to fight for some of these things. It's too big for the town of Brown Isle, Kansas to go have an anti-polio program. They need to be able to be part of a bigger one. And the bigger one that we have is the U.S. government, and the people out there trying to dismantle the U.S. government on a chopping block, are just destroying what makes our country the envy of the world. And so I just had to get that off my chest, and sorry for the rant. It gets going.
It was on topic.
It reminds us of why we're here.
Yeah, what we're resisting.
Yeah, just keep at it, guys, is all I'm asking. And because that's key. And that said, thank you all for coming. Any last words?
Thank you, Bob, for publishing our poem.
Yes, thank you.
Oh, hey, thank the 5 editors who worked tirelessly beside me. You want to know, I honest to God was afraid I'd be hit up with a bill for counseling after making them read 250 stories.
I don't know how they did it, because I have to dip into those stories very gently myself.
And let's put a call out to Adam Troy Castro for destroying the social conscience of so many people with his story.
It was a devastating and brilliant story.
It was wonderfully brilliant, and and it's not alone. It just happens to be the knockout punch. And thanks, David Gerald, for writing the afterword, which is actually the name of his story about a grandfather watching America being reborn.
It was a good way to end the book.
Some hope.
Yeah.
All righty. And there's also a bunch of other wonderful stories. Louise Marley has 2 stories.
Yes. Well, thank each and every one of you for being here.
Yay. And thank you.